And away we go with another edition of the Stampede Wrestling Show.
Welcome to Hart Beat Radio. It's a great honor to have probably one of the greatest legends of wrestling, the Axe himself, Larry Hennig. But joining me this evening as our co-host, I'll introduce this man. He's one of the most noted, he's an author, he's a historian of Minnesota wrestling, an authority. I've met the man many times. Great guy to talk to, Mr. George Shire. George, welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
Hey, Bob, I'm great, delighted to be on. It's going to be a fun 2 hours.
Without any further ado, I'll introduce our host, Bruce Hart. Welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
Thanks very much, Bob, and I'd like to welcome my good friend George Shire for coming on. You know, I've had some conversations with George. I always enjoy sharing perspectives and talking with people that are knowledgeable and educated. And George is one of the foremost authorities on the Minneapolis wrestling scene. And for anyone who's been a wrestling fan, they know that Minneapolis was one of the really major territories on the wrestling map for years and years, is dating far back as the 30s and 40s, the Tony Steckers, and then later on the Vern Gagnes and Wally Carbos in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and they used to rightly refer to themselves as the Major League of Pro Wrestling, and there's a fascinating history in the AWA, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of that with George. And, of course, one of the big stars in the AWA, two of the big stars, in fact, back in the 60s, 70s, and whatever, were Larry the Axe Hennig and Handsome Harley Race. So, but, yeah, I'd just like to thank George for coming on, and I'm really looking forward to talking with a guy that I have the utmost respect and regard for, Larry the Axe Hennig. I've had a chance to meet Larry at Cauliflower Alley a few times, and I've crossed paths with him on occasion. I feel like I know him because I knew Kurt. I had a good fortune to meet and hang out with Kurt Hennig on occasion. You know, an awesome guy, an awesome wrestler, and I know Harley always used to, as far back as the 70s, was always speaking very respectfully and fondly of his former partner and his great friend Larry Hennig. So it's really a pleasure and an honor to have Larry the Axe on today, and I'm looking forward to hearing some stories firsthand about some of the road trips with Harley and some of the antics with some of those legendary Minneapolis guys. There were so many, like the Crusher and the Bruiser and the Vern Gagnes and the Shooters and the all the other, the Von Raschke's and the Mad Dogs and all of that. So it should be a great show.
Bruce, I want to tell you that it is indeed an honor to be on Hart Beat Radio. And when you talk about Larry Hennig, you know, Larry was such a major part of the upper Midwest market, the AWA consisting of so many cities in the upper Midwest, Minneapolis being the headquarters. It was always referred to as the Minneapolis territory or the Minneapolis office. But Larry Hennig, he was the master. During the 60s, he absolutely ruled in the territory. And at his tag team with Harley Race, you know, that was back in the era when Larry Hennig was not the Axe. He was Pretty Boy Larry Hennig, along with Handsome Harley Race. And they were heels to the fullest degree. And, man, I'll tell you what, those guys could put butts in the seats. And we all know that's the name of the game. That's what it's all about. And they were so good at what they did. And then both outside the ring, just absolute gentlemen, gems of people, two guys that you just got to love because they're such decent people. But they sure gave us a lot during their time together.
I was gonna mention that, but my dad always used to say, and I certainly second it, I've never ever heard anyone say a bad word about Larry the Axe or Harley. I've heard nothing. And in the wrestling business, as you would know, George, that means a lot because the wrestlers, unfortunately, are prone to backstabbing and double. You know, it seems to be part of the business. But I don't recall anyone ever saying a bad word about Harley or Larry, or for that matter, Curt Hennig. You know, it was always respect, and quite often they were in awe of Harley and Larry and Curt, and it was all those stories, but they were always told with great reverence about all those guys. You know, how tough they were, how good they were for the territory, and they did so much for the young guys, and they were great for the business and all like that. So that's one of the
Bruce, when you talk about the tough guys, I mean, you really are talking with Harley Race. His being a tough guy is legendary. He's a legit tough guy. I mean, if you're in a back alley and you got a gang after you, I think you want HarleyCe on your back.
And Larry the Axe too, you know. Both,
and Larry is just Roger Kent, our old AWA announcer. He used to say during Larry Hennig's matches, he'd say that Larry Hennig was big enough to go bear hunting with a switch, and that was so true. But just great words that described Larry to a T.
I'd like to welcome to Hart Beat Radio, Larry Hennig. Good evening, Larry. Welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
Well, it's nice to be here. In fact, as a matter of fact, I'm about 4 months away from 80. It's just nice to be anywhere.
Good evening, Larry. It's George Shire. We're on together along with Bruce Hart tonight. So really great to have you on, Larry.
I was told that you just recently celebrated your 60th wedding anniversary, too. So congratulations on that as well.
Well, you know, God has been good to us. At this point, we have 25 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We have an all-star at Stout University in Wisconsin. My grandson, Joe, is with the WWE, which you know. And he
I had a nice visit with Joe in Amsterdam, New York in May, and tremendously impressed with him just as a person, you know, and a great worker too. I won't change subjects, but I've felt for a long time that Joe is way better than WWE's used him. I'm hoping that they finally open their eyes and give him the so-called break that he deserves, because he's, from what I could see, a great talent and a great guy, and deserves to be maybe wearing a belt or being far more in the spotlight, but hopefully that might happen. But anyway,
some good news is that he just recently signed another 4-year contract. You know,
that's
that's a good sign. But you know, here's the problem. It's not really a problem, but you know, there's only one Ferris wheel in the WWE and in wrestling nowadays. And
that is, I would say that is the problem.
The guy that owns the territory not only owns the Ferris wheel, but he owns all the seats. And I guess that's a simple way to put it, but that's what it is, you know. And everything has to go through Vince, which we all know, and all the shows that he's got on TV. And I watch him more now, and I tape him, of course, when Joe's on. But it's unbelievable. He's got the only game in town. And some of the stuff that's going on I don't approve of, and some stuff that I do, of course. I can be objective, but he's done a good job with Joe. I think he's just waiting to get a break, and I know Joe is certainly ready for that right now. He calls me he flies in on Wednesdays, and he talks to me from the airport to home every Wednesday. So I get a good weekly report. I think it's around the corner, and what's great about wrestling though, from my era and Harley's era and Kurt's era, but isn't it nice to be on here and we're talking about the past and the good things and the bad things, and there were plenty on both sides, but now we're talking about the future. And there's a good question for everybody. Where is the future going? Is it in the hands of a few? Is it in the hands of many? Is it in hands of people that are going to remain and respect the business? Those are good questions, and they have to be addressed, and they have to be answered.
I think that's a great point you make, Larry, and I know even when my dad was alive, he wasn't even knocking WWE, but he said he felt at some point they need to re-sow the seeds at the grassroots with the territories, the fans, the wrestlers. He said you can't. My dad and I believe the same. You can't have all the wrestlers coming out of the same training facility. That was one of the beauties of the business in my day and your day was these guys. There were so many territories that had great, wrestling, in Minneapolis and Carolina and Florida and Amarillo and Portland and the Maritimes and Montreal and Detroit and all these places, and they all had a slightly different style, and the guys, and I remember that was one of the great things up here or anywhere else, I guess. You'd have all these guys that came from all these different backgrounds, and it always, kind of brought out the best. And my dad was one of those guys who never really demanded that they wrestle his style. He wanted the Japanese guys to do their thing, and the guys that came up from Minneapolis to do their style, and the French Canadians to do theirs, and the guys from Tennessee, and that they're pretty good on the mic, and it made for it was always a fascinating cross section of all these different things, and that was one of the things that made the business as good as it was, and that's one of the things I think's missing today. For me, it's a bit stale or a bit stagnant. The style is the same. The guys are all coming out of the same, factory, and you got the same bookers and the same whatever, and it's hard to keep it fresh, which is, I guess, why they keep bringing guys like Sting and all these guys back, and a lot of those guys are old buddies of mine, but that's always, to me, the biggest sign that something's not working when you have to keep relying on the past rather than the future. In the old days, you'd bring in a...
Well, what the real difference is that it used to be able to develop your own character. Mad Dog Vachon, the Crusher, just to name a couple. You had a way of... he represented Milwaukee. Vachon represented someplace else. But you got a different style, and you got a chance to do what you do the best of. And today it's changed because of the business. But developing your own style and characters, a lot of that has gone by the wayside now. And I think it's going to come back. I'm hoping it'll come back.
I'd like to throw something in here, guys. Larry, a little bit ago, you referred to it as and I thought it was a great analogy. You referred to it as a Ferris wheel, and Vince owns all the seats. And I think that might be the biggest change that the old and the new have had to adapt to over the last few decades. In that, as you guys are talking about, in the old days, if you were in Minneapolis and you were here for 6 months, a year, year and a half, whatever it was, and And if you got tired of your role, or you didn't feel you were treated fairly, or whatever the case may be, you could basically go to another territory and get a new start, new gimmick if you wanted to, all those things. There were so many places for the wrestlers to go and so many different opportunities, and it was all up to the individual wrestler. But today, because of that Ferris wheel, Larry, as you refer to it, there is only one place to go, and there are only so many spaces on the Ferris wheel. And, in the case we mentioned Joe Hennig, Joe has to wait his turn to get on the ride. And in the old days, that wouldn't have been the case, and it was up to the wrestlers to kind of decide their own destiny. And if they wanted to stay in a certain territory, some of them had a niche. You mentioned the Crusher and Mad Dog, and Larry yourself. You were such important parts of what they called the Minneapolis territory, the AWA. But you three guys, you were the AWA. And
I really appreciate that. But let me just throw something in here, and it was a matter of economics, guys with families that had to travel. But when you had a family and you get down, you're not making a lot of money, you say, geez, I got to do something here. I got a family to take care of. I got bills to pay. I got things to do, hospital bills, and I got to figure out, now what can I do, and they would move on. They would move on to a different character, or they'd move on to a different
not too many
promotion.
Not too many guys stayed in one place for more than a year or two at a time. I remember when I was a kid, that was one of the fascinating things, is all these guys, and some of them were huge stars, the George Scotts and the Bill Millers and the Johnny Valentines and the Killer Kowalskis and guys like that, and Kaniski and them. They'd be up for about a year, no more, and then it was on to another place, and but it was part of what kept the business interesting, and very, very rarely did you see any of these guys, even the biggest stars, unless they were part owners of the promotion or something like that, staying for any more than a year or two, and it was kind of good and bad, you had to uproot your family and all this other, but in its own way, I think the fans must have loved it. They're getting a steady ongoing supply of all these, and there was so many more workers too, I might add, back then, because you had 20, 30 territories going at the same time, and you had great stars coming from every territory. And that was one of the other things you'd probably recognize, Larry, is they protected the business a lot more. I know Calgary is one of those places, and Minneapolis, they were two of the most notable territories for, they had a few old shooters or pistols, as they used to call them, that would, take you down and instill respect in you, like that. But it was, really, they went to great lengths to protect the business and keep fans thinking it was on the level and all like that, and it was part of the code of the business back in those days. These guys like Stu, and there were a few of them, Byrne had them, and these old shooters would, the Ruffy Silversteins and the Rube Wrights and the some of those old, and they were kind of feared with the business, if you were booked with. I remember my dad telling me about some of those guys, and my dad was kind of one of the practitioners of all that, but there were certain guys, Gordienko and them, that if you were booked with them, you weren't sure if you were going to get out of the ring unscathed or not, and you didn't want to piss them off.
You got a whole sack full of iron there. Some of the guys who were on. Some of these guys were unbelievable, and yet every one of those guys that could, like your father, for instance, a great example, Vern, a good example, and of course other people, and that was the backbone of our business, And there was still a time when the sports announcers and writers and people would still acknowledge them and give them a Brad Ringen type guy, and
Carl
the guys that respect business. But and of course that has changed now. But when I look back at my career, when I look at some tapes, and I look back, I truly miss the business. I'm so glad that I've got a third generation in there, Joe. And not only is Joe, I keep going back to Joe because I know he's the future. And of course, Harley and I, we did so many things together that it was unbelievable. But I sent him down to Harley's camp, down on Lake of the Ozarks, I think it was, and he worked there seminating geese and working side jobs, sleeping with a mattress on the floor, doing these on and off jobs, and then maintaining, and he stuck it out down there. He paid his dues, and I'm hoping that he does get a break. I'm sure Vince is going to do that, and actually, he's the only one that can make a decision. I know I get boring because I keep going back to the future here, but it was I came up to Calgary there, and your dad had me come up. I wrestled as the Viking there. I drove up from Minneapolis. I know it was in the wintertime and it was colder in Minnesota, and they had a limousine, and the midgets were there. And the only thing I didn't like, there was nothing going on Sundays. I remember that.
I think the only thing that went on Sundays was Mabel parties, which were, I don't think you were up here for any of them, but they were, that was kind of one of the things they perpetrated, a few of those Mabel parties on, I think, on old Don Jardine, and this poor old fart called the Great Antonio. they had a few of those Mabel parties going on with. Well,
there were still I don't know if the movie houses are open on Sunday up there.
Oh yeah, it was kind of people buying. If I tell them this stuff now, like all the liquor stores are run by the government, and you everything shut down on Sundays, and there was. I don't think women were even allowed into bars unless they were escorted by a guy and stuff like that. There was all kinds of, kind of.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, if I could, I'd like to talk a little bit about Harley Race, and it was like it was meant to be. To this day we haven't had an argument. To this day, he's the worst driver in the world.
Oh, he's got a can of beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Going about 200 miles an hour with pedal to the metal. And
let me tell you a story. I went down to Florida. I went down to Arizona to do some promotion. It was the wrong time. The only thing we could get on was those Bibles, TVs. But anyway, I went back and went to Florida, and Harley was there. And we were at the wrestling office in Tampa at Graham's place there, and we were going to Miami, West Palm Beach. And I was going to fly. I flew with Graham in that little airplane he had, and we were in the wrestling office at the same time, and going to West Palm Beach. We flew. Harley drove, and we got there. Harley was putting his shoes on. Now, you tell me how fast he had to drive to get from Tampa to West Palm Beach, and we flew, and he beat us there. So figure how fast he had to go. and he gave me, I'll tell you where else he made me nervous. We were in Australia 2-3 times. And, of course, there you ride on the other side of the road. It wasn't bad enough on the right side of the road, but trying to visualize these things on the left-hand side is a little different. But I love the guy. We never had an argument. Our word was our bond. We never did two things the same. That's made us a great combination. I did all the aerial work, and Harley did the surface transportation. I'm lying about that, of course. It was the other way around. But
I was hoping you weren't going to make me correct you on that, Larry, because we know that Harley was the bump taker.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a term that you don't even hear that much these days. But I remember that was the first thing I ever heard about Harley long before I ever met him, and we had guys up here that had worked Minneapolis or wherever, and they always referred to Harley as the ultimate bump taker. He was like he had the signature big high backdrops and the turnbuckles, and when I first saw him, he was everything that I had heard he was and more. He took those big high bumps, and he was one of those guys who he spent most of the match getting the other guy over. His ego was such that he didn't care. He wasn't trying to get himself over. He was already comfortable with who he was and all like that. But he made all these. Any guy I ever saw him work with, Harley made him look better, which is one of the big compliments you can pay to a wrestler in this business. Is one of those guys who makes everyone he works with look better than they deserve to look. And Harley was sort of
we driving down the highway, and I says, Harley, do you realize how famous you are? What are you talking about? I said, look at that sign. What does that sign say? It says bump ahead. You're famous all over the United States, Harley. You don't even know it. And every time you see one of those bumps, say bump ahead, bump. That's about all I want out of you, Larry. That was kind of a funny.
Guys, one of the things that really made that era special, and Larry, when you hooked up with Harley Race in 1964, you really kind of changed tag team wrestling in the AWA, because up until that point they didn't really have a direction as to where they were going and who was going to be the champions and the whole story. But when you and Harley got together, you had a mega push right from the beginning. And, you had that combination of, as you said, Harley being the bump taker, Larry, you being the brute in the ring, the strong arm and the tough guy. And then the two of you on the microphone, you really got you made the fans hate you enough to want to come and see you get beat, and that's the name of the game if you're a heel. And you guys did it better than no one. I mean, when you were handsome Harley Race and pretty boy Larry Hennig, Larry, I still see you standing there in the interview areas when you would talk about they're going to build the monument of you and Race being the greatest tag team combination ever, and that no one could beat you. And and they followed through on storylines. And I think, and I don't know, Larry, if you remember this or not, but one of the greatest storylines was how you and Harley were campaigning to get the tag team title, and you were saying that the Crusher and the Bruiser were avoiding you, and the Crusher was not to be seen. He had lost a loser leave town match several months earlier, so he wasn't around. Well, then you surprised everybody, you and Harley, when you, in December of '64, you were feuding with Vern Gagne and Reggie Parks in tag team matches, and Wilbur Snyder stuck his nose into it, so you said you were going to find a partner, and you guys came up with Dick the Bruiser. And, of course, you bragged about how it was a coup, how you had that one half of the tag team champions, and you were going to be the best tag team in the business. And so Bruiser turned on you guys, and that set up the return of the Crusher, and then in January of '65, you guys got the belts from him. And the next 4 years, I mean, you were AWA magic.
Yeah, that's until, that deal with my knee in Winnipeg. And we drove home.
How did that happen, Larry? I heard you had a really bad knee injury with Johnny Powers or something like that. Or
Yeah, it was in Winnipeg, and then they wanted to keep. Harley and I had the championship, and they wanted me to stay over in Winnipeg, and I said, hey, I'm not going to do this. I want to go back and have the doctors look at me in Minneapolis. So I Harley drove, and I got in the back seat and laid on the back seat there with that leg of mine and with a bottle of Crown Royal, and so we made it back.
Only one.
And then they checked me in the hospital. That was on a Friday. I think Winnipeg run on Thursday or whatever it was. And anyway, I'm laying in the hospital, and then the Wally Carbo came up and got me, and they said, Larry, you got the belts, you got to go to Chicago. So this guy laying in the bed next to me, I was moaning all night. I had really a bad leg. And they come and got me and told me, can you do this for me? And I said, yes, I'll do this. So they got me up and dressed, put me in a wheelchair, and the guy in the hospital bed next to me said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Chicago to wrestle. He didn't believe that. But anyway, we made it through the deal. It was another sellout there with those guys. I've got a deal here at home, and I remember the match before that. I made $1,000. You know, in those days, that was you know, not a
that was huge. You know, that was huge money back then.
Yes, and then anyway, the story is, so they come to my hospital bed, and of course I made it down to the ring in Chicago. I stood on the apron, and Harley went in there, and it just got too heavy, and then we did lose our title. And so I went back. They flew me back to Minneapolis, and checked in that night after I flew back. I caught a late flight, and they operated the next day. And then I thought, well, at least I'll get a good payoff out of this. You know, I got 4 or 5 kids. So I got the check, and it was $1,050. They gave me $50 more. It was a complete sellout there, and at the least I wasn't very overwhelmed with that. And but what could you do, you know?
That was the days long before they had the arthroscopic surgery, so it's a lot lot recuperation after knee injuries back then, you know.
Yes. But, you know, we recovered. You know, a lot of people don't know that I wrestled like half my career, you know, with that bad leg. And somehow I learned to work around it. I got down on the mat. I had to keep going, you know, big family. A lot of mouths to feed, a lot of bills, just like everybody else.
Oh, yeah, there was no safety net, and still isn't.
Well, Larry, we should point out to our listeners that you were really one of the smarter guys, though, because even though, as Bruce says, you know, you didn't have the insurance or you didn't have the promoters taking care of you if you didn't wrestle. If you didn't wrestle, you didn't get paid. It was that simple. But you kind of had the hindsight to start a real estate business, and it's been lucrative, I think, for you through the years.
Yes, I had an auction today in Minnesota, some hunting land. I've been doing 1 or 2 auctions a month, plus my real estate. You know, and people are calling me, so they still want to do business with me. So there's no gray area in my. So you know, it's
I know as far back as the late 50s, I would see in the wrestling programs Larry Hennig Realty.
Yeah.
And you know, they used to have the little ads in there, and I remember them being in the programs, of which I still have all those programs.
You know, you haven't thrown anything away for 55 years. You got more stuff. Well, if I did, Larry, then I wouldn't be able to
keep track of all you guys. So.
Well, you're doing such a good job with that. You know, Irene and I, my wife and I, you know, of course, we've been together 60 years, but you're the old and the new, the encyclopedia, and then of course, you know, the electronic guy now that has all that stuff around, and it's amazing. You told me I had 447 wins, Harley and I. I had no idea anybody was keeping track of that. But
well, and actually, I will tell you, I found a few more since I did that record for you. You know, the one thing about doing results records for wrestlers and territories and that sort of thing is it's never a finished job, because there are always one more, two more, five more that you find. And when I find them, it's almost like I've just found gold. I get a rush. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this. So and so was in this territory, you know.
Yeah, George.
Yes.
George, Bob here. I've got a caller calling in here.
Hello,
Hennig.
This is Boris Zukov.
Oh my God.
Boris, welcome to the show.
Yes, it's great to be here. I've been enjoying listening to all this. Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, Boris, if I recall correctly, you came into Minneapolis territory around the early '80s, and you were working with the Sheik, Adnan Casey. So I know you had to work. I know you worked against guys like Martel and Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell. You worked against Tito Santana and some of those guys, Curt Hennig.
Yeah, I sure did. And when I first came in, it was around '85, I believe. I was working with. I worked a lot with Sergeant Slaughter when I first came in.
Yes, I think they were doing the America's title thing or something at the time, weren't they?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yep, but we sure did. Yeah.
And then you had worked with Sergeant Slaughter when you were in the Southern Territories. I believe it was the Carolinas. The Carolinas. I started working with him there, and I guess 81, 82 is Private Jim Nelson, and then got tagged up with Don Canodal, and so I was affiliated with Slaughter during that time in the Jim Crockett promotion. Did you, Larry Hennig is on with us, and we are just privileged to have Larry the Axe on with us. Did you and Larry ever get a chance to work together or meet?
Yeah, a couple times. Then, of course, I got to work a lot with Curt, and man, he was fabulous. What a great babyface he was. Golly, man, he was great. He was so much energy and had so much fire and stuff, and took great bumps, and I loved taking bumps with him too. So he was phenomenal.
Well, Curt Hennig, just like his dad, Larry. You talk about the bumps, you talk about being a great baby face. Larry was, and Curt just followed in his footsteps. This was one of the things where they could be a great heel or they could be a great baby face. And not every wrestler could do that. Some wrestlers just were baby faces. Some were just heels. But Larry and Curt, man, they just had it down. They could do it either way, and the fans flocked to see them.
Yeah, they sure did. In fact, when Curt came over to the WWF and stuff, came over as a heel and stuff, I missed working with him, because I was a heel and he was a heel, and we never got to work together again, So I missed him being a babyface because he was so much fun, could sell. God, he made everything he did was just unbelievable. So I really missed that.
I want to say something about our friend on there that he was a great worker, good guy, mellow guy, and didn't say much, didn't cause any trouble, but just worked hard in the ring, and very, very believable and very strong. And to me, he was a great guy. There was a few of them, Rene Goulet, and there was a bunch of us in here at that particular time. But I have to say something about Curt again. From the time he was born, he was. I got 5 children, but Curt in the high school, he could do. They had those vignettes that they did with Curt, and he could actually do that stuff. He was an amazing guy. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I know my brother Brett and Dynamite and those guys always had so many nice things to say about Curt. They raved about what a great guy he was, a great worker, a great guy in the dressing room, great team player, all that stuff. So he,
Brett, when Brett came to Kurt's funeral, took the time out and he came here to the funeral, and I was standing there. He brought me over and that taped the match that he had with Kurt for that AWA or WWE. I don't remember quite now.
Intercontinental title match.
You know what he said? He says, "Your son was one of the greatest workers that I ever was in the ring with, and I want you to have this." And we have it, and at least once a year, maybe holiday times, we show that. And so I know that your brother and Kurt were they not only were wrestlers, but they were athletes, and that made a difference.
There was a few like that. But yeah, I was actually there that night when Brett and my dad was too. I was in New York, Madison Square Garden, SummerSlam, I believe, and Kurt and Brett had Intercontinental title match, just incredible match, and
yes,
and congratulating Kurt in the dressing room after, and but he was always very modest and never had a big ego or anything either, I might add. He's always very humble, and it's a tribute to you maybe, but phenomenal worker and athlete, but always one of the boys, never had a big ego, or wasn't about himself or anything like that, which is why why the boys like Brett and Dynamite loved him, So.
Well, we don't have bad days here about Kurt even today. We go to the mausoleum there and visit him, but we get bad minutes. I'll hear a song or something reminding, and especially all his kids. One daughter put herself through; she's a registered nurse. The other one is his youngest boy is going to college, and he lives with Joe. Joe is doing successful stuff, and his sister's now had a young baby, and so. They're all doing well. They're good people. They're working hard. No problems. And and that is the bottom line. They're 25 grandkids, and they're good people. And that's
I can attest to that. Just
so nice.
Guys, and Larry especially. I'd like to piggyback on that because we alluded to earlier in our talk tonight about how the travel and the territories, and I think we can all agree that type of business back then really took its toll on a lot of wrestler families. The guys were on the road so much, and they were away from their families. They probably didn't get to be with their kids and wives as much as they'd have wanted to be. Sometimes not at all, and we've heard stories about wrestlers being divorced and that sort of thing. And Larry, I tell you what, you just set the example because Bruce, I've had the chance to visit Larry's home, and one thing I was so impressed with was all of the family pictures and the stories that go with the pictures of the kids and the grandkids and Larry and Irene are a very, very close family, and that is a testament to Larry that he stayed with the AWA territory partly because he didn't want to have his family subjected to a lot of travel and a lot of disruption in schools, etc. And I don't know. I think I'm speaking the truth there, Larry. That's really some of the reasons that you did.
And like Ganya and I really didn't get along that good, and
right.
Because when they switched me around and I was babyface first time when I saved Greg Ganya, and then they put Vern and I in one match as a tag team against Bockwinkel and Stevens. We get in the ring and the people are going, the axe, the axe, the axe. They never even mentioned Vern's name.
I mean, I think that's what I alluded to earlier with how you were one of those, not every wrestler could do this. Sometimes they were just a hardcore heel, and that's where they were at their best. But you were a heel, and you were arrogant and pompous in your heel era. But when you switched over and made the save, for our listeners, that was a TV save where you saved Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell from a beating from Bockwinkel, Stevens, and Heenan. And this was the official turn of Larry Hennig turning babyface after you had come back from New York. You were out there and wrestling and come back with the Axe persona. You had the beard then.
So Sherry, listen to this. So I go back to the corner, and he wants me to tag him. And I said, Vern, I can handle this job all by myself. I don't need you. Of course, he was the boss and the wrestler, right?
Right.
When I got back, I had some bumper stickers made. The Axe is back. The Axe is back, and they were about 2.5 feet long, and they were white with bright red. And at the TV station, I put them all over Vern's car, on the bumper.
And you told me that. That's hilarious.
Okay, so listen to this. So he couldn't figure out why everybody was honking at him. He thought they were honking at him. They were honking because I put those bumpers down.
How was your relationship with Vern through the years, Larry? Was it up and down? Or I know Harley told me he had a few issues, which is why he ended up not being there for a long time. But I heard from a few guys that had been in there that Vern was not always the easiest guy to work for. There was, certain things that were part of the, working that territory, And,
let me just tell you, it happened here. It happened in a lot of other territories. As soon as some of the wrestlers that became promoters, they didn't think that the people could get enough of them. So they were constantly putting themselves, guys, can we get everything rolling? And then
I know my dad broke in a few of those guys. He broke Fritz in up here back in the 50s, and he used to hear all these stories about Fritz and some of the stuff going on there later on. He said he found it hard to believe because Fritz, when he was up here about maybe 55 or something, was pretty... my dad said he was pretty humble at that time and didn't seem like he had that big of an ego.
I took a train to Chicago and wrestled Fritz in the old Marigold or the old days. They didn't know there was a Larry Hennig and a Lee Hennig, Al Hennig, but when they booked me, they thought I was Lee Hennig. He was an old time wrestler.
Yeah, old jobber or something.
We should point out too that Lee Hennig was ING at the end, and Larry is IG. They've been mixed up.
He's Swedish and I'm German. So I go into the locker room. He says, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Larry Hennig." He said, "You aren't the guy we sent for." I said, "Well, I'm here, and I took the train to get here." And he's putting his shoes on, tighten them up, put them in the lace. He said, "Well, I think we'll have a match." He says, "I wonder if there's a way that I can beat you too straight without hurting myself." I said, "What did you say?"
Ouch.
You want to beat me too straight without hurting himself? I said, "What kind of vocabulary?" I always remember that. Those are things that you remember.
What was Wally like, Larry? He was another legendary, but he was like my dad.
If there is such an animal as a funny Polak, you got him. That's Wally Carroll.
Well, I know we were planning to have Paul Vachon call in, and Larry, I know you've worked both teamed and wrestled against Paul Vachon, and of course along with his brother Mad Dog.
Yes, I did. I certainly did, and I certainly enjoyed it. There's two guys that are a little different. Great guys. If you met one Vachon, you met them all. They walked and talked and did a lot of things the same. But I enjoyed my time with him when he was here, and we had some great matches.
Well, I know you, with Paul Vachon, along with Mad Dog, you and Lars Anderson, you wrestled against the Vachon brothers some matches, and then, of course, as I said, you also teamed with both Mad Dog and Butcher at different times during their careers.
Yes, I did. And they're a throwback, to part Neanderthal and part something else. But they were good guys. They enjoy life to the fullest. Eating, drinking, like most of the wrestlers, I guess, in that day. But I enjoyed being with them, enjoyed talking to them, and I saw him, I think, at one of the fairs. I can't remember just which one it is now. But
okay. Well, I know Paul and along with Mad Dog when he was still with us, but I know they did attend many of the Cauliflower Alley Club reunions, which I think I'm going to use as a lead-in, Larry, to at the very onset of the program, it was mentioned that this past April in Cauliflower Alley in Las Vegas, you received the Iron Mike Mazurki Award. And we're talking about Mad Dog Vachon. He is another one of the legendary wrestlers that received that award. Harley Race has received that award. Killer Kowalski has received that award. Stu Hart received that award. I think you can see where I'm going here when we're talking some real, genuine, tough, rough wrestlers that really set a standard above all others to earn the Iron Mike Award, and you were honored with that this past year, and I know that was special for you. And maybe you could share with our listeners another special part of the presentation that year, or this past April, when you received the Mazurki Award, but you were also presented with something else that I know was very special for UNIP.
Well, the one of the awards was that this 3x4 picture that was painted of Kurt.
Right, that's what I'm referring to. Yep.
And it was unbelievable. It was the guy had been working on it, Rob. Yeah, Rob.
Rob, yeah.
Well, I can finish my story about the Cauliflower Alley Club thing. I was funnier than Steve Martin that night. I did a half-hour stand-up, and the people never sat down. I had enough information about enough wrestlers there to keep that thing moving. And then, of course, Harley got injected in there. But this picture was a presentation. Most fabulous picture, what great work he does to get that award. And I just got another award in Minneapolis here. They opened up in the state of Minnesota a wrestling Hall of Fame, and about
that's
3 weeks ago.
That's in your hometown of Robbinsdale.
In my hometown in Robbinsdale, and Vern Gagne and I were the first inductees into the State Hall of Fame in Minnesota, and back into at about 3 blocks from my high school. They have a building, the area was donated to them by the city, and it was quite a thrill. And I had my grandsons. My boys got twins, and my daughter's they're all 12. And for the finish, I brought them up there, and one wrote his own thing about Papa, and he had everybody in tears.
Wow.
But to get that award in Minnesota with all the wrestlers that came out of here, and I'm the first alive or partially alive wrestler that was inducted, and my high school wrestling coach was there. He's 87 years old.
Wow.
And he, John Grugalko, greatest wrestling coach, and he surprised me. His health hasn't been good. He showed up. It was quite a deal for me. So to be inducted in the first, it was a thrill to be there and to receive that in the state of Minnesota.
Well, and I know, Larry, you've also been inducted into the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame down at the Dan Gable Museum in Waterloo, Iowa. Along with Kurt Hennig was put in as well. An honor, the first father and son wrestling tag team to go in. So that's an honor.
Well, you know who got Kurt in there was Bret Hart. They had a chance. They had a chance to write in who they wanted, and Bret was at the meeting, and he says, "I would like Kurt to be in there," and he was inducted unanimous. Well, we weren't only inducted; we were inducted unanimously. With that means we didn't have one
with the Waterloo Hall of Fame. All of the wrestlers that have been inducted previously into the Hall of Fame are on the nominating committee each year, so you do have votes there. And then I am proud to say I'm on the nominating committee, and I know when Kurt's name was on there, I cast a vote for him. And, of course, Larry, you got my vote when that came around. But I know Bret Hart advocated for Kurt to get in, and that was an honor to have you both in there.
And then Then later on, I received the Luthez Award there.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like the older I get, the more stuff. But I'm enjoying it all. I really I appreciate that I get these things, and it really means a lot to me. And I've got a lot of nice awards here, and I've been very lucky, and I love the business, and I go with my grandkids wrestle. I go to all the matches, and I like wrestling. I enjoy wrestling. My high school wrestling coach, my high school coach told me, he says, I was his first state champion here in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. So you either got it, kid, or you haven't. And I always remembered that.
Larry, I was going to point something out to you. I know you made your professional wrestling debut in 1957 in Mankato. I think you remember that. And your very first opponent was a guy named Billy Wicks, who was from St. Paul, Minnesota. I just wanted to pass on to you that Billy, he is still with us, but he is not doing too well right now. I got word the other day that he's in ill health, but he wrestled here in the Twin Cities area, off and on a little bit in the 60s, but really made his name down in the southern states. Had a great feud with Sputnik Monroe back in 1960 and thereabouts. But he was a good talent, and I know you worked with him in your first pro match.
My first match, Harry Camaches was the promoter. Billy Wicks was my opponent. Then later on, Billy Wicks, I think, got involved in the police force or something.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
In down there, I tracked him for a while. So he's not going. If you could get me an address for somebody out there, I would appreciate it. I'd like to send him a note if he.
I will do that for you. I will take care of that for you. We'll see that you get in touch with him.
I remember a few years ago, Larry, I was out with Roddy Piper, the late great, and he told me that his very first match in Winnipeg was against Larry the Axe Hennig in maybe 1970, somewhere in there, and he told me he was about 160 pounds, and he said the match didn't go too long, but he was still talking with awe in his voice when he was telling me about it, and and my very first match, I was a skinny little kid and Larry the Axe Hennig, and he told me it was one of the big thrills of his career was to even be in the ring with you, because he had been a huge fan and all like that. And but yeah, I remember him telling me that story, and his eyes were lighting up.
The story I got about Rowdy is that he wrote a book, and then, of course he spent some time in the book about our match. He said it lasted 27 minutes or 27 seconds. and then
he told me 10 seconds. So I don't know.
Well, whatever it was, I said it would have been a lot shorter, but I had to stop and tie my shoes.
always strings attached.
So I made it 27 seconds so I could get that in. He was a character, good guy. Yes.
Yeah,
glad he had to go so young.
Yeah, Larry, another guy that we lost recently that you were well familiar with for a while in the 70s here, that was Dusty Rhodes. You worked with him as a tag team partner.
Oh, I got memorabilia. He was there's 10 top guys on the microphone that I've been involved with, and Dusty was certainly one of them. Yeah, he had that quirk, he had that technique and person. He had that microphone personality. He could make it come alive, certainly.
That back in that era too, the microphone and the time that you had on the mic to promote your opponents, your upcoming matches, that really was your time. You had to grab the fans during that time. And Larry, I'm going to again put you in that same category. And I talked about Harley earlier. You guys were magic on the mic. I think if you make a list of the top guys that were ever on the microphone, Dusty, Piper, Hennig, Race, and Nick Bockwinkel, and Mad Dog Vachon, and Ole Anderson was good, Rock Rogowski. You guys, you had the magic. It was everybody could take a lesson from you. Ray Stevens was good. Bobby Heenan. We should put Bobby Heenan probably at the top of the class. I mean, what a way when you wanted to get yourself over, and nobody could do it better than Bobby.
Yes, but when I'm going to say something about the Harts here. I read, he was in Kurt's time. There were people that were characters and whatever, but Brett brought to the microphone this charisma and this believable way of introducing himself and promoting what he was doing in such a way that it made him so unbelievable, in which he was unbelievable. He was great. But, it took all kinds to make it work. And I think that's something that maybe he's missing a little bit now. He was an individual. He was the personality. The Crusher was a personality. Mad Dog was a personality. Pampero, Furpo. You remember?
Oh, yeah, Pampero. Very, very good.
Well, I remember another old character, Larry, that I met him when I was pretty young, but I was down in Amarillo in the early 70s, like 72, and Dory Sr., he spoke extremely well of you. I guess he said he had known you back in the maybe the early 60s. He said you were in there for a bit, but I remember he had nothing but really nice things to say about you. This is about 72 or so, about maybe a year or so before he died, and he was another of those old school guys, but he spoke extremely highly of you and said he remembered you back in the early 60s where you were in there for a stretch back in before you ever did Minneapolis. And
there were guys like him and Bob Geigel. They were a different kind of guy, different breed.
Yeah, the old school, as they say, they're all half amateurs and kind of protected the business and respected the boys and all like that.
Yes. Bob Geigel came up here and wrestled, and we traveled a lot of miles together. Of course, Renee and Reggie Parks, and there's only a few guys I jive with. And but those trips to Winnipeg, I raced on a snowmobile from Winnipeg to Minneapolis 2 years in a row. That's 500 miles, and it was like 35 below. And
were you ever able to get Harley in one of those races?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I think he was born with a cigarette in his hand. He smoked a lot, but it didn't interfere with his work. It's amazing. He's one of those naturals that came back, and he could do it. And
well, I think there were a lot of guys back in that era that you mentioned Harley doing that, but Ray Stevens was another guy who could go out and party with the best of them, and when it comes time for his wrestling match, the guy was just spot on in everything that he did in the ring.
I remember I went to San Francisco when he was on top there, when Shires was promoting there.
Right.
And we were in a bar across from a park where they had a big flagpole. Have you heard this story?
No,
I haven't. This guy wanted to. They gave Ray Stevens the key to the city. I was there, the mayor.
Okay.
Ray Stevens had the key to the city of San Francisco, and that's just funny in itself, because
Right.
He went, oh yeah, well anyway. We took the guy in, and there was a big flagpole with about 1.5 inch rope on it. The flag was down. It was that night in the bar coming, so we tied the guy's leg up and hoisted him up the flagpole. The guy was upset, hollering us down. So I don't know. He may be still there.
Oh boy!
I don't know. We did a lot of things in the ring.
It's funny you're mentioning some of those names, Larry, and it seemed like there was a lot more of those outrageous characters back then, the Stevenses and the Buddy Rogers and the Dr. Jerry Grahams and Sky High Lee. I remember when I was a kid, and my dad would always be mostly complaining about, because he had those guys working for him, but there's always something going on with them and the police and getting drunk and Johnny Valentine was another, shootings in the dressing room and ribs and it's kind of like but you don't see those types of characters that I know of anyway in the business these days, but back in the day, the Ted Christies and Don Fargo's another one, they were kind of legendary for the ribs and the debauchery and the drinking and the all the other, but
it was amazing. It was amazing, these guys, and then they would get in the ring and perform.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember my dad. My dad seemed to almost have a penchant for bringing him up here. I'm not sure exactly why, but and there was always something going on with Dr. Jerry Grahams or the Ray Stevenses or the Buddy Rogers, or there was always something with outrageous rib or a practical joke or somebody putting X-Lax or something in somebody's drink.
These were, here's the thing. These were real guys. And they're some of the biggest stars in the business. They didn't talk about it. They did these things. And not only in your territory or Vern's territory or Australia, that Valentine got in so much heat in Australia that they asked him to leave, They asked him to leave the country. How the hell bad can you be? We don't want our country anymore. That's heat.
And for any of the listeners out there, those were all among the biggest names in the business. They weren't just kind of, average workers. They were like, some of the biggest stars in the business at the time. But I remember my dad was constantly amazed with all the, the outside the ring activities that those guys were engaged in. It seemed to be always like the talk of the business. But didn't seem to be anywhere near as colorful a bunch of wrestlers today as there was back then. I'm not sure whether that was part of the deal back in those days, but just kind of a wild bunch, I guess.
Yeah,
Larry, I think another one of the great pranksters. You can verify this for me, but I think Red Bastien enjoyed some antics from time to time.
Yes, he did. Red and I were great. Of course, Carol, they were at my house here several times. Luthez was here. I took him out fishing, and there were so many great people that I had. Ray Stevens, I'd tell you a story. He had gone all around the loop, and now he came back to Minneapolis, and he had spent all his money, and he had another wife, and so he come and stayed with me, and we were sitting in the sauna and, one day, and the winter was coming on, so I gave him a hat and some mittens, and then he traveled with me around to the towns that I went to for my real estate and auctioning, and we were in this bar, and he said, I'd like to borrow $50 from you. I said, well, okay, I don't have a problem with that. So I went to the bathroom, I come back. You know what he did? He bought a round for the house. I borrowed $50, and he said, and he bought a round for the house. I said, Ray, what? Well, that's great. That was Ray Stevens. That's something that he would do. We had some property we bought, Bachwinkle, myself, and Ray, and he was wrestling in Milwaukee, and I had a 28. We sold it. He got $28,000, and that back then it was a lot. So I brought it to the dressing room, and he just put it on a table, and he just told somebody, "Watch this. I got to go. He would go out and wrestle." It was falling on the floor. He didn't care. It didn't. He said, "My name is Ray. You'll find me fair." And that's a good way to tell you about the guy. He was a great guy. I love this guy. I really did.
I imagine he probably had some influence on Ric Flair. Flair seemed to be the same,
Yes.
And he was in Minneapolis back in the early days, I guess, Flair. So I imagine he was patterning himself after the Buddy Rogerses and the Ray Stevens.
Yes. He did a great job of that. His dad was a doctor. Did you know that?
Yeah.
He was a physician in Minneapolis here. So he
I
came from
the name Nature Boy off Buddy Rogers, if I'm not mistaken. That was part of the.
But what you do is you got to take it one day at a time. And I had a couple stents put in the other day. My arms got a little sore, and so my wife took me down there, and they said, you got something going on. So they miracles. They put you on a table in 2 minutes, and it's all gone. It's done. Whatever bothered you. So I'm feeling really good.
Well, that's good. We want to hear that.
Oh, God. Life goes on.
Larry,
can I say something about this? Has got to be the greatest. I'm not saying it because I'm doing it or you're doing it or whatever, but who else is going to take the time to dig up these people and these events that they did and their personalities like you guys are? I mean, it's to me, it's a classic. This has got to be a classic. I don't know exactly where you go, but whatever you're doing, there's got to be a lot of big base out there for this, because there are some.
Larry,
everywhere I go, people want to talk about Pretty Boy, and I like to play. I play a lot of Texas Hold'em. I like that, and I play in tournaments and stuff. And the minute I go to a new table, they start talking about Pretty Boy, and so I know they've been around for a while. But
you certainly transcend the eras, Larry. You go back to the the 50s, 60s, and an incredible run. When you first went into Minneapolis, was when you were a kid, was Stecker still around in those days, or was that? My dad told me
right near the end. I think when Wally and Vern bought Stecker out, his boy was kind of running it.
Yeah, but it was
Stecker's
Dennis
boy.
Stecker, Tony's
Dennis Stecker.
son.
You got to tell you a story about Bronco Nagurski and your dad, Stu.
Oh yeah.
They're riding with me from Minneapolis to Thunder Bay, Ontario. That was a trip of a lifetime. Your dad was, and you know what? You sound an awful lot like, unless I don't remember correct, I think you sound a lot like your dad. Has anybody told you that before?
The odd time, I'm told I don't quite stammer quite as much, but
that sounds like Stu Hart.
You got it. That's great. That's great there. I remember. I think I was at your house one time. We were down the basement there, and they had a mat down there, and so.
Oh yeah, that was where the so-called dungeon.
Yeah, and then he'd say to the guy, I'm going to show you a little hole here, or something like that.
Oh yeah, it was always.
Christ, you could hear the guy screaming in Mankato, Minnesota, for Christ's sake. Who wanted to be turned loose?
I remember a few times, and my mother never ever set foot in she refused to go down into the basement there, but somebody was screaming way too loud, and I guess my mother had guests upstairs or something, and she threw a big
murder.
Yeah, she threw a big salad bowl down the stairs, and you hear the smash, and Stu goes, I think Tiger's calling me. Like that,
I gotta remember after the matches we stopped to get some beer or something, and I pulled up in front of I was driving, and no one got out of the car. Bronco and your dad stayed in the car. I said, okay, I'll get the beer. Funny people. We had a great time, though. We really did. You guys must own your own radio show. I've never been on a thing this long here. This is unbelievable. How often do you do this show?
We do it every week, and like I said before, it's an honor to have you on here. We had Dick Byers on here last 2 weeks ago for about 2 hours, and had like Terry and Mick Foley and just a ton of guys, and it's always.
Oh, that's great! Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to interject something here, because Dick Byer has been mentioned, and I know Larry, he's going to remember this well, but we talked about Cauliflower Alley a little bit ago, and this was one of Larry Hennig's finest moments. We're at the Cauliflower Alley banquet, and Dick Byer, as everyone would know, is always walking around with his Destroyer mask on. Nobody would know Dick Byer because he wrestled, the vast majority of his career either with a Destroyer or a Dr. X mask on. So here's the Destroyer running around, and Larry Hennig grabbed the microphone and he said, Dick, take the mask off, it's over. And one of the great comebacks from Dick Byer in the Dick Byer voice, he goes, I could still kick your ass, Hennig. It was great. It got a lot of laughs from the whole group.
Yeah. Well, I told him this last time. I said, Dick, you're gone way overboard. I said, I went in the men's room and opened the stall up, and you're sitting in there with your mask on. What the hell is wrong with you?
Well, Dick Byer did have an 8x10 glossy photo. It's a publicity photo and it is of him as the Destroyer, and he is actually sitting on a toilet seat. You can't see the whole toilet, but it is a toilet seat, and Dick told me the story that they needed him to sit down for the photo, and that was the only place there was a seat, so he sat in it. But if you look at the photo, you can see the top of the toilet seat.
If I can just say something about Shire, he's really the encyclopedia of wrestling, a guy that's really meticulous and articulate, and some of the books he's wrote have been really great. There's a lot of he's got. I don't know where he gets all this information, and I'm not saying it. I'm telling you it the way it is. That he's one of the greatest book writers, and he has more wrestling knowledge than a lot of other people. So, and he's done things for me. So,
Bruce, we'll talk about that, and I'll see that you get a copy. Larry, I truly appreciate that. That is so kind of you. But really, where I get this stuff is, I think it's a credit to guys like you and all of your compadres through the years. I started out as a wrestling fan like everybody else as a kid, and somehow the addiction just got a hold of me, and I became infatuated with results and statistics and characters and all that stuff, and I saved all the programs from all the, you talk 30 territories. I have programs from all the 30 territories. So I got all the information and all the results and the newspaper clippings and all this stuff, and so it's easy for me to come up with this information. What I don't have in my head, I can certainly go and look up. And it's just fun for me to have guys like you.
Let's put it this way: it's not a job for you. You love what you're doing. You can tell that.
I love it.
When you see the material that you come out with, and I've always had a great. I'm not a smoozer, and the same with the Hart family. They're, you're an original great group of people. Your family, your dad, and I met your mother, and the good people, and so there's so many good things that come out of wrestling, and a lot of times you only hear the bad things, but there's people like you guys and several others that have made this business what it is. They can never take that away from us.
Yeah, it's guys like you and Harley and the Dory and Terry Funks and guys like that have made the business so special, what it is, and anybody that's met any of those people or had the privilege of hanging out with them kind of knows what I'm talking about, and that's one of the things that concerns me maybe about the future of the business, because there was, and I'm hoping that there's, guys like that still in the business and, having an opportunity to be part of it, but I'm not sure if there is. It seems to be kind of, as you said before, it's kind of all in one basket now.
I don't think that they'll ever come back. The only thing, like I keep talking about, is that we have to keep the future alive. I'm glad there's some people out there like yourself, like Shire and you, Bruce, that bringing that nostalgia back from the past. And the only way we got to communicate that is by talking about it. And people are listening, and they'll what we're saying and what we're doing, they're going to remember, not all of it, but they're going to remember part of what we've done tonight, I'm sure. And
Larry, on the various radio shows that you listen to here in the Twin Cities, that there's always a demand for that old school wrestling talk. People have their memories. They appreciate what all of the guys did, and they look at it differently today because now they're all older and they do remember you and the Crusher and so on. And there's never, ever a dead moment when we get on those radio shows and we start talking about old school wrestling. The phone lines at the studios light up. The fans are there to line up and ask questions. They want to know about certain wrestlers. They remember fond stories. And so you guys, the history is never going to die as long as we keep that alive. And keeping history with records and statistics, that just continues to keep it alive. It doesn't do any good to be tossed in a file cabinet somewhere and never shared. So knowledge not shared is lost, and that's why I enjoy doing what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what else to say. I'm just glad to be around. Like I told the doctor, I want to be here to watch. I go to all football games. I go to wrestling. I go to volleyball. I could go to an event every night and see a different grandkid in a month.
I remember you said the story about your 25 grandkids that you have trouble remembering their names, so you just yell out for number 21, come here.
Yeah, I gave them numbers.
You gave them numbers. That's great.
I gave him numbers. I said, 27, give me a beer. He said, I'm busy. Get 12 to do it.
I love it. Oh, that's great.
You ought to see this place when they're here with their pets and their babies, and it looks like a blown-over daycare center around here. And I'm in charge of the boat, the gasoline, pop, and the barbecue. That's my job here.
Right.
And but Irene and I, we enjoy it, and she's a great grandma. And the kids, we love to have them over, the grandkids. That's our life, and you know what? They're all healthy. We talked about this. So important. And being good people is important. And passing that things along that you can pass from one generation to another.
Right.
The good and the bad and the evil. But God has been good to us. God has been good to our family. And what else could a guy, and I've been lucky, my business has always been pretty good, so we do things that some people can't do, but people sometimes can't do. It doesn't make that much difference, but I'm just saying that we're very, very lucky people, and we appreciate that. And I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate too, Larry, that the wrestling business is lucky to have had guys like you and Harley and some of the other guys we've been talking about in it. You guys are the you're the guys who sort of
on tonight or sometime.
Yeah, you guys are the guys who laid the groundwork and the foundation for the Vince McMahons and the Hulk Hogans and the CM Punks and the John Cena's of today, and I'm pretty sure, I hope that those guys have a lot of gratitude and remember that,
Bruce, they wrestled in Minneapolis, so I'm not a hang-around guy. I don't like to go down there, but Joe was going to be wrestling in the Target Center here, so I went down. And drove up in front, and the guy at the front door said, "It's Larry the Axe." I haven't been down there in 20 years.
Isn't that something?
But they still remember. And but here's the deal. I walked through there, and I said, seen all these buses, these $500,000 buses. I said, who do all these buses belong to? Oh, those are the wrestlers. They got their own drivers.
Wow.
Really? Really? That's very interesting. So it has changed, it's a different day.
I grew up as a young kid in Winnipeg, big AWA fan. You and Nick Bockwinkel and Jimmy Valiant and Maurice and Butcher and all those guys were among my very favorites back in the day. So if you had maybe a quick Jerry Blackwell story, tell us.
I had some good matches with him. I didn't wrestle him that much, but I can't say anything bad about the guy. He got the most out of it, what he could in the ring. He was limited, but
Jerry Blackwell was one that for the big guy and a wrestler that appeared to be so out of shape by appearance-wise, Jerry Blackwell was phenomenal for his size with what he could do in the ring, and so believable. And, he could do a standing drop kick, which was amazing.
Yes.
He was the exception to the rule, because typically back in that era, you had the big guys, the Haystack Calhouns and the Man Mountain Mikes and guys like that, not degrading them in any way, but they were more of an attraction who came into the territory, and they really couldn't do much in the ring. It was up to their opponent to make them look good. And Jerry Blackwell was the exception to that rule. He was phenomenal.
Got time for a quick Haystack Calhoun story?
But I'd love if you did, yes.
Well, we were flying to Japan, and they had to put him in first class because he was so big.
Yeah.
He had a big iron chain, and he had the bib overhauls.
Right,
and they put him in first class, and the food up there that they gave him wasn't the same food as Harley and I got in the back of the airplane. It was all rich food, salmon and all this stuff, and he was used to mashed potatoes and hot dogs and stuff. Well, he loaded up on all that wine and stuff, and all of a sudden he started having trouble, stomach cramps, and he had to go. And they couldn't get him into the bathroom on the airplane, so they took him back to the galley and gave him a mail sack, and we could hear him back there going, oh. They had to give him a mail sack. He had to go back to the galley to go to the bathroom in this mail sack. And he only had one pair of bib overalls along. Then he had to walk back the whole length of the airplane the other way. And, of course, Harley and I were up blocking the aisle. And the stewards were walking behind him with atomizers. He's trying to get rid of the smell. And you enjoyed that more if you sat on and had a couple of cocktails first. So I thought I'd just pass that along.
I think the visual that you paint is very good.
Thanks for everything, and I'll look forward to the next time, and God bless, all the best.
And Bruce, I want to thank you and Bob for asking me on tonight. It was fun co-hosting with you guys. And I guess I have to put in the cheap plug at the end. I know, Bruce, you mentioned earlier that you'd like to get a copy of my AWA book. I will take care of that for you. I'll make sure that you get a copy. But I'd like to let listeners know that if they are interested in the AWA specifically, they can go to Amazon.com, and it's Minnesota's Golden Age of Wrestling from Vern Gagne to the Road Warriors, and it's I think it's around $21 or something on Amazon. But I think you'll enjoy a great history of AWA wrestling.
If it's possible, George, I'd love to get you on the subsequent show just to discuss the golden age of the AWA, and we've just scratched the surface a bit tonight with Larry and some of the stories on Harley, but there's certainly a wealth of all these characters, like some of the ones you mentioned, the Road Warriors and Kurt and Baron von Raschke and Crusher and Bruiser and Red Bastien and Billy Robinson, all those guys. So
very definitely, I'll be excited to come back on again with you, and we can talk old stories. And I just want to share with you too, Bruce, that though I'm probably most noted for the AWA because that's my home territory, I can talk old school wrestling of any territory, and we can have as many stories and fun because I did a lot of traveling back in the early days, back in the late 60s and 70s, and then, of course, I have, like I said, all the programs and everything to talk to other territories.
I'd love to do that, George. I know a lot of my other old cronies, some of them you probably know, like the Terry Funks and the and the Ric Flairs, and maybe you could bring Greg and Jim on. I'd love to have them on as well. I spoke to Greg a few times.
I will talk to them both. I'm going to see Greg this week. He's coming over to my house on Thursday, and I'm going to see
nice guy, Greg. I've spoke to Greg a few times. Always a gentleman. So that would be great. I'd look forward to it.
Thank you, guys, and thank you, Bruce. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, George. God bless.